They punished the cowboy to marry the cursed Apache widow, but he agreed without hesitation.
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The land flattened west of the Stone Ridge, opening to a shallow basin ringed by scrub and low rock outcrops, the kind of place that collected quiet without meaning to. Morning was still young, but the heat was already collecting in the creases of the land, pressing down in dry silence. Wind passed only in short gusts. No birds moved. The only sound came from below, a gathering. Sharp words spoken low, not in anger, but with finality. That kind of tone was familiar to David Holt. Judgment, not argument. He reached the crest of the hill with the sun behind him, pulling the reins to slow his mare. The animal's flanks twitched against flies. David adjusted his grip and stood still, not out of hesitation, but because what he saw required a moment to read. There were at least 20 Apache gathered in the clearing. Some stood in small groups, others apart. No weapons drawn. No celebration either. In the center, a woman had been tied upright to a cedar post hammered into the earth. Her arms pulled back and bound. She wasn't struggling. She wasn't crying. Her head was held up. Her shoulders were tense, not proud, just locked in place like she didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her bend. David didn't know her. He didn't know what she'd done or why they were doing this, but the shape of it felt wrong. He stayed on the ridge for a minute more. Watched how no one approached her, not even the women. One child pointed until his mother pulled him back by the collar. There was a space around her, like someone had drawn a circle no one wanted to step inside. That told him more than the post did. He mounted again and rode slow into the basin. He wasn't invited, but he moved like a man who didn't ask for permission. The air grew heavier the closer he got. A few heads turned, but no one spoke. When he dismounted, he kept the reins loose in one hand and scanned the group carefully. 3 men stood closest to the woman. One held a rope. David walked forward without quickening, stopped a few paces from the post, and looked at the man with the rope. "She yours?" The man blinked, confused, maybe offended. He looked toward the elders before answering. "She belongs to Death," another voice said. David turned his head slightly. An older man had stepped forward from the main group, not dressed in anything ceremonial, just plain buckskin and worn boots. His face was flat, unreadable. His tone calm. "She brought sickness. First her husband, then both sons. All died in a year. Then the midwife that touched her. Then the boy born under her shadow. She's not accused of action. She's accused of presence." David kept his eyes on the man, but didn't answer. He looked at the woman. Her breathing was shallow, but controlled. Her cheek was swollen, red high along the bone. Her eyes met his briefly. She didn't ask for help. She didn't look down. The elder continued. "She cannot stay. We sent her out. The post is not paying. It is marking, so all know what she carries." David looked back to the rope. "Untie her." The man holding it stiffened. So did a few others. One reached toward something at his hip, stopped halfway. "I won't ask twice," David said. "Not here to fight, but I won't ride on by this either." The elder narrowed his eyes. "You interfere. You take her." David didn't flinch. "You marry her. You take her far from here. You do not return. That is the judgment now." There was a beat of silence. David turned to the woman again. Her expression hadn't changed. Her jaw was tight, her wrists raw. "I didn't come here to find a wife," he said, "but I won't leave someone tied to wood like an animal." The elder didn't nod. He simply stepped back. The man with the rope hesitated, then dropped it. David stepped forward and untied the knots himself. The rope had dug in deep. She winced, but still didn't speak. Once her arms were free, she stepped away from the post, but didn't run. She waited. No tears. No thanks. No movement toward anyone else. David turned back to his horse and led it by the reins. She followed behind him at a distance. No one tried to stop them. No one called after her. The group parted without sound. They walked for over a mile before he spoke again. "You hurt anywhere?" "No." Her voice was low, uninflected. She didn't ask where they were going. "I got a place west, out past the bluff. You can rest there a while if you want." She didn't answer. He didn't press. Her name, he later learned, was Naya. She was 26. had been married since she was 16. Her husband was a hunter, dead now. Children both gone from fever. She wasn't cursed. She was just left standing when others had fallen, and that was enough for people to look for patterns. David didn't believe in curses. He believed in what men did with their fear. He'd lost his own wife and child 4 winters ago. Sickness took them in a span of days. He'd buried them alone. After that, he didn't go into town much. Didn't keep company. Just worked, rode fence, kept his herd alive through seasons that didn't favor the weak. They stopped near a dry creek bed to rest the horse. He handed her a canteen without words. She drank, passed it back. He offered her a strip of jerky. She took it, chewed slow. As they sat, she watched him from the corner of her eye, waiting for some shift, aggression, demand, insult. But he only checked the cinched strap on the saddle and looked toward the ridgeline. She spoke once. "You don't have to keep me. You made your point." He answered without turning. "They didn't give me a choice in taking you. But I've got a choice now. And I'm not one for leaving folks behind once I've started something." She stared at him for a long while before turning away again. They rode on. That night, they made camp in a dry basin. He gave her the blanket. He didn't tell her where to sleep. She chose the opposite side of the fire and lay down without a word. David stayed up a while longer, watching the fire settle low. He didn't feel angry. He didn't feel heroic. He just knew he'd seen something wrong and stepped into it. Whatever came after, he'd carry it the same way he carried everything, quiet, steady, and alone, if it came to that. But she was there now, and he didn't ask her to leave. They arrived at the edge of his property just before sundown. The land stretched wide and uneven, marked by low hills and thickets of brush, the kind that gave little comfort but plenty of cover. The small fence line he'd put up 2 years ago was still holding, though one corner leaned from wind damage that hadn't been worth fixing. A few cattle grazed in the distance, barely visible as silhouettes against the last of the amber sky. The barn stood farther off, square and weather-beaten, next to the smaller cabin, which had no porch, no trim, no sign of softness. Just 4 walls, a slanted roof, and a metal stovepipe curling upward like a quiet warning. David didn't say a word as they passed the final bend and the cabin came into view. He noticed her hesitate, just slightly, when the chimney smoke caught her eye. It wasn't fear, not anymore. It was a kind of bracing. She'd made it this far, and now she was waiting to see how the story turned. He didn't open the door for her. He walked ahead, set down the saddlebag, and gave the mare a light rub behind the ears before leading it toward the corral. She followed slowly, stopping at the door, but not stepping through. Her arms stayed folded in front of her body, not crossed, just held, as if she was still deciding whether this place was meant to be shelter or just another waiting place before being cast out again. When he came back from tying the horse, he didn't look at her directly. He unlatched the door, pushed it open with one shoulder, then stepped aside. "You could take the bed. I'll set a cot by the stove." She didn't move at first. Her eyes scanned the inside of the cabin. Dirt floor, wooden walls, low ceiling with no loft. There was a small table, 2 chairs, one bed with a plain wool blanket, and a corner shelf where tins of dried beans and jars of lard sat untouched. She entered without speaking, her feet making no sound on the planks. David closed the door behind her, hanging his coat on the rusted nail to the right of the frame. He didn't lock it. She stood near the window, facing away, while he took down the folded cot from the wall and laid it out beside the stove. The fire inside had nearly gone out during the days he'd been gone, but he managed to coax it back with kindling and dry cedar bark pulled from a cracked crate near the hearth. The flames grew slow, steady, enough to cast soft light across the room, but not warm it fully. The cold wasn't sharp yet, but it was coming. He could feel it in the way the boards creaked tighter underfoot. "I'll cook," he said after a minute. "Won't be much. Beans and cornmeal. Got some dried apples if you're hungry." She turned toward him slightly, her face unreadable, her hands no longer gripping her arms. "That's fine." He filled a small pot with water from the bucket near the door, set it on the stove, and began moving without rush, not explaining what he was doing. She didn't ask. She sat down at the table, straight-backed, hands folded in her lap. The fire made her skin look darker in the glow, her face leaner. Her braid had loosened, strands of hair falling across her neck. He noticed the red along her wrists where the rope had been, raw in spots where the skin had broken. He didn't mention it. She didn't hide it. While the food warmed, she looked around the cabin again. Nothing on the walls. No photographs. No keepsakes. The shelves were clean, organized, empty of anything sentimental. There was no sign of anyone else ever living there. And there hadn't been, not since his wife and daughter passed. This place had been built after, as a way to keep busy, to survive, not to remember. He set a tin plate in front of her, then one for himself. They ate in silence, not out of discomfort, but because neither one of them had anything that needed saying yet. The kind of silence that had no weight, just space. When they finished, she rose and rinsed her plate in the basin, dried it with the cloth he'd left nearby, and returned it to the shelf without waiting for direction. He noted the way she moved, efficient, deliberate. She didn't ask where things went, just chose the most logical spot and left it there. He appreciated that. He finished his plate slower, stood, and placed it next to hers. As he cleaned up, she approached the bed and ran a hand over the blanket. She didn't remove her shoes. She didn't sit down yet. "Is this really what you want?" she asked, voice low. David looked up. "No, it's just what is." She held his eyes a moment longer, then nodded once. Not out of agreement, but understanding. She laid down on top of the covers without removing her belt or loosening her braid. Her eyes stayed open, fixed on the ceiling. He didn't say goodnight. He didn't move toward her. He folded his coat as a pillow, sat down on the cot, and leaned his back against the wall. The fire flickered soft shadows across the boards. A long time passed before either of them shifted. When he finally did, it was only to bank the stove. "You safe here," he said, not turning around. "Whatever you think's coming, it ain't from me." He heard her exhale, not quite a sigh. "People say I bring death. People said a lot of things about me once, too." That was all. She closed her eyes. He kept watch until the fire dimmed. Sleep didn't come easy, but when it did, it came without dreams. For both of them. The next morning broke cold and clear, the wind cutting across the open ground with no trees to slow it. A coyote's call echoed, faint before fading into silence. No smoke rose yet from the stovepipe. The sky was pale and empty. The world felt too still, like it hadn't yet decided to begin. David had been up since before the light changed. He didn't sleep much, not since the illness took his wife and daughter. What he got instead were short spells, rest without peace. He'd sat on the cot for a while, boots already on, coat shrugged over his shoulders, watching the orange flicker behind the stove door fade and glow in turns. He listened to the creaks of the boards when the wind pressed on the walls. That told him the cabin would hold another season, but no longer without repairs. He moved slowly, letting the morning unfold as it pleased. He didn't rattle pans or strike up a fire yet. He just stepped outside, careful not to wake her. The door latch stuck, same as it always had, and he pushed it firm before it gave way with a soft clunk. Outside, the air bit sharper than expected. He scanned a fence line to the east, where the lowest post sagged farther now. One of the calves had wandered too close last night. Small tracks in the dirt told him that. Nothing stolen, though. That was good. He tugged his gloves tighter and moved toward the barn. He worked without noise. Fed the horse, checked the feed sacks, ran his fingers along the bridle leather to see where it'd need mending. The stillness suited him. Always had. The only difference now was that the stillness wasn't his alone anymore. When he returned to the cabin, she was standing at the table, fully dressed, boots on, her hair retied. Her eyes met his, then moved away. The blanket on the bed had been folded neatly, the cot untouched. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded once. He built the fire back up, poured water into the dented tin pot, and set it to boil. They didn't speak. There was nothing wrong in the silence. It settled the space between them like an old routine. She didn't sit until he did. When he placed a piece of pan-fried cornbread and a strip of dried beef on her plate, she didn't thank him, and he didn't expect her to. "I've got a broken gate on the east side," he said quietly. "It'll need hammering back in." She nodded again. "I could do laundry," she said. He looked up. I saw the buckets and the line. "If you want." He gave a slow nod. "All right." They ate in silence after that, just chewing. The kind of chewing where you measure the day ahead in what's left on the plate. She moved fast after breakfast, collected the wash buckets without asking where he kept them, found the soap tucked in a tin behind the stove, and filled one with the last of the well water from the barrel. He caught her glancing once at the old tin basin near the door, where his late wife had once washed her child's clothes. She didn't ask. She carried the bucket out to the back, arms steady, expression flat. David watched her go, then grabbed his coat and tools, heading the opposite way. It was better like that. The gate repair took the better part of an hour. The hinge wasn't just bent, it was cracked near the pin. He used a spare strap from the shed to reinforce it, hammered a fresh nail where the post had split low. His hands worked steady, no wasted motion. When he returned, she was kneeling by the line, pinning shirts with her arms bare, sleeves rolled up past the elbow. Wet clothes clung heavy to the twine, sagging toward the dirt. Her hands were red from cold, raw at the knuckles. He saw her flinch once, just slightly, as she squeezed out a pair of his trousers. She didn't stop. "You don't have to do all that in one go," he said. She didn't look up. "I'd rather finish than sit." He understood that. He stepped away, headed to the barn. There were 2 traps to check before noon. Coyote signs had been fresh the week before, and he'd set them near the north draw. He saddled the mare and mounted, not saying goodbye. She didn't ask where he was headed, but as he passed the cabin again, he saw she'd turned slightly, her eyes following him until the trees took him out of sight. The traps were both empty, but the signs were newer. Prints in the dirt showed a pair, not just one. He needed to set another along the game path, farther up the slope. As he worked, his thoughts kept drifting, not in full ideas, but in half notions, images. Her hands scrubbing fabric against the washboard. The way she moved with speed, not fear. The way she didn't speak unless there was need. He'd known plenty of women in town who talked just a close distance. Nia didn't. She wasn't trying to be understood. She was trying not to be seen too much at once. He returned past midday, boots dusty, rifle slung across his back. The cabin door was ajar, and the smoke from the chimney thinner than it should have been. Inside, he found her standing near the shelf, wiping down the jars. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "You said that before." This time she looked at him directly. "I know what people think, that I bring death. I know the signs to look for. When a man feeds you, he either wants to own you or save you. But you haven't done either yet." David didn't move. He watched her hands. "I don't need saving," she said, "and I won't break. If you're waiting for either, you'll be waiting a long time." "I'm not waiting," he said. "I just work. That's all I know how to do." She looked away, nodded once, then stepped outside without a word. He let out a slow breath, unsure what it meant, but it didn't feel wrong. That afternoon, they worked side by side without planning it. She hauled the kindling from the woodpile, stacked it under the porch overhang. He split logs from the pile, near the corral. At one point, their hands brushed near the axe handle. Neither pulled back fast, but neither lingered. By dusk, they had finished every chore that could be done before dark. Inside, the stove crackled again, and the smell of beans simmering filled the cabin. She stirred while he laid out the plates. "You ever live out this far before?" he asked, watching the pot bubble. "No. You worry?" She paused. "No more than usual." They sat, bowls warm in their hands. The fire popped once, sending sparks against the grate. "I don't expect thanks," David said. "You don't owe me anything." She glanced at him, eyes sharp. "And you don't owe me patience." He nodded. "Then we're even," she said. He half smiled for the first time in days. That night, they said nothing more. She took the bed again, without hesitation this time. He pulled the cot closer to the stove. The wind picked up around midnight, rattling the boards slightly, but neither of them moved. When he woke briefly to adjust the fire, he looked over and saw her still asleep. Face soft, one arm curled beneath the blanket, hair loose across the pillow. He sat for a long moment before laying back down. There was no plan for tomorrow, but there didn't need to be one. Routine would come. Survival always built it whether you meant to or not. And for now, she hadn't left. That was enough. The morning came overcast, with low clouds sagging like wool against the sky. Wind pushed through the valley harder than the day before, sweeping grit across the yard and making the woodpile lean. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to coals, leaving a chill in the corners. The smell of ash lingered under the faint aroma of dried sage hanging from the rafters. David sat on the edge of the cot, boots already on, elbow resting on one knee as he stared at the stove. He hadn't slept much. Dreams didn't visit him often, but when they did, they always brought back the same thing: shadows of his wife's cough, the way his daughter's hand slipped from his, the stillness afterward that couldn't be filled. He stood, stretched his back until it popped, and moved to feed the fire again. The kindling sparked easy. Once the flame took hold, he added a thick log and watched the orange light crawl up its sides. Naya stirred just after that, shifting under the blanket. She didn't speak, but he heard the soft shuffle of her feet on the planks as she stood. Her braid had come loose overnight. She retied it quickly, face unreadable, before slipping her arms through her coat. "Fence still holding?" she asked without looking at him. "For now. Wind's testing it. I'll check the west posts after I bring in water." He nodded, then pointed toward the half-empty barrel beside the door. "We'll need to top that too. You shouldn't carry it alone. I've carried worse." She opened the door before he could argue. The wind caught it and pushed it wide. She stepped out with the bucket before it slammed shut behind her. He found her half an hour later near the second gate, sleeves rolled up to the elbow again, one hand holding a hammer, the other steadying a new slat of wood. She had found a pile of scrap in the shed without asking. The post beside her had been reinforced with a leather strap taken from one of the saddlebags. "You patched that on your own?" She looked at him. "Didn't see you out here." He almost smiled, but didn't. "I was checking the line past the ridge. Something spooked the cattle. Might have been a cat." Her eyes followed his gesture toward the slope. "You go alone?" "Always do." She didn't reply, just turned back to the fence. He watched for a moment longer before stepping closer. "Need help with the next one?" She handed him the hammer without speaking. They worked side by side the rest of the morning, resetting the line, packing dirt around loose posts, checking for fresh tracks. A few deer prints, nothing bigger. The sun didn't break through the clouds once, and by noon the wind had picked up even more, pulling strands of her hair loose despite the braid. At one point, her fingers slipped on the iron nail she was driving in. It skidded, slicing the skin beneath her thumb. She hissed quietly and stepped back. David reached into his coat, pulled out a handkerchief, and stepped toward her. She didn't move. He took her hand gently, not to control, just to see, and wrapped the cloth around the cut without pressing. "You'll need it clean tonight," he said. "I've bled worse." "I know. Doesn't mean you need to again." She looked at him as he tied off the knot. There was no gratitude in her expression, but no resistance either. Just a moment of stillness where she let him tend her without pulling away. "I'll finish this line," he said, stepping back. She flexed her fingers, tested the wrap, then picked up the hammer with the other hand. By late afternoon, the fence line was set. Inside the cabin, the air was warmer. He'd stoked the fire and put on a pot of beans again, though this time he'd added onions she had found hanging in a mesh bag near the ceiling. She sat at the table, sleeves now buttoned, hands resting in her lap. He served her first without a word, then poured his own. They ate slowly. The wind outside had started to howl. Dust scratched at the windows. "Storm's coming," he said. She nodded. "Sky dropped twice like that before the last flash flood back home. We'll need to brace the barn. I can pull the spare planks." He looked at her carefully. "You always take on every task first." She wiped her mouth, set the tin down. "If I work, they don't send me away. That's how it's always been. They don't run things here." "I know. Still feels like I'm waiting for someone to say I've stayed too long." David leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, watching the fire settle lower. "No one's keeping score. You're here. That's enough." She didn't reply, but her shoulders eased slightly. After supper, they reinforced the barn with planks nailed crosswise over the wide doors. Wind tugged at their coats, kicked grit into their boots, but they didn't stop. He held the boards in place. She swung the hammer. Once inside, they shook off the dust and sat near the stove. The heat reached their faces, but their backs stayed cold. She reached up, slowly undid her braid, and ran her fingers through the strands to loosen the dirt. It wasn't vanity, it was routine. cleaning off the day. He didn't stare, but he noticed. "You ever plan to leave?" she asked suddenly, still looking into the fire. He paused. "No." She turned to him. "Why?" He shifted in his seat, pulled one boot off slowly. "Spent too long chasing things I couldn't fix. Towns, graves, guilt. Out here, it's quiet. Nobody asks anything of me. I can wake up, fix a fence, feed a horse, and not have to lie to anyone about how I'm doing." She considered that. "So you stay because the land doesn't ask questions?" "No, I stay because it doesn't pretend to care." She nodded. "That I understand." For a moment, neither moved. Then she stood, pulled the blanket from the bed, and sat on the floor near the stove instead. She didn't explain why. She just folded the blanket around her knees and leaned back against the wall. He watched her a moment. "You can take the bed. I already had it 3 nights. You live here. You take it." He didn't argue. They sat that way until the logs burned down low and only the faint glow of embers remained. Outside, the storm hadn't broken yet, but the sound of it coming felt close. When he finally rose, he placed a second blanket near her without a word. She pulled it over her shoulders, her head resting against the boards. David lay on the cot again, arms crossed behind his head, eyes on the dark ceiling. Sleep came quicker this time, and when it did, he didn't dream of sickness or loss. He only remembered the way she held the hammer, with strength that didn't shake even after she bled. Rain never came that night, but the wind stayed violent until dawn, hurling itself against the cabin walls and dragging branches across the roof with a dry, scraping sound. It wasn't thunderstorm weather. It was the kind of wind that stripped bark and unsettled animals, the kind that made fence posts lean and made you check your rifle without admitting why. By the time David opened the door the next morning, the ground was hard-packed again. The dust settled in thick lines along the porch seams. The air had that dull, heavy weight that meant more weather might still be circling somewhere west. He stood there a long while, coat unbuttoned, eyes moving across the land like he expected it to tell him something. It didn't. Behind him, the cabin stayed quiet. Naya hadn't stirred yet. She'd slept sitting up, same place she'd claimed the night before, the folded blanket still pulled around her knees. Her breathing was slow, steady. Her hair was tangled against one shoulder, lips parted slightly. He didn't wake her. Instead, he walked out across the yard and toward the corral. The smallest steer was gone. Hoofprints in the dirt pointed north. He followed them a ways, saw where the animal had broken off through a gap in the far fence line, likely spooked by the wind and the creaking post that had worked itself loose overnight. David didn't curse. He just turned back toward the barn, saddled the mare, and began checking his gear. The leather strap across the saddle horn needed oiling. The rifle was loaded. He didn't like leaving the cabin for long. Not now. Not while the air fell off, and strangers were always a possibility. But a missing steer was still part of the job, and he wasn't about to let his herd shrink while he stood around hoping for better luck. Naya was standing by the well when he rode back toward the house. She tied her hair up, washed her hands and face, sleeves rolled past her elbows again. She met his eyes before he spoke. "One of them's out past the north line. I'm riding after it." She nodded, then asked how far. "Could be half a mile. Could be 6. I'll go with you." "No need," he said. "Might not be safe." "I didn't ask if it was." He hesitated, reins tight in one hand. The wind pulled at her skirt slightly, dust curling behind her boots. "I've followed lost things before," she added. "Animals, people. I don't lose track easy." He studied her face. No challenge in her expression, just resolve. A calm certainty. He finally gave a single nod. "Grab a rifle." They rode without speaking. The trail cut through sagebrush and dry grass, rising gently toward a ridge where scattered boulders cast long shadows even in the mid-morning light. The tracks remained visible, pressed deep into the earth by the steer's weight. Every few hundred yards, David would dismount to check the depth and direction. Naya watched each time, memorizing the pattern. Her mare kept pace, hooves sure over uneven ground. By the time they reached the ridge's edge, the sun had risen high enough to warm the back of their necks. David pulled up short when he spotted the steer in the distance. Caught between a gully and a rock face, its front leg tangled in old fencing wire someone had left half buried years back. He exhaled slowly and dismounted. "Stay mounted," he said. But she was already off her horse, moving ahead of him, crouching low near the animal. It wasn't thrashing, just breathing hard, head low, eyes wide with exhaustion. Blood streaked the leg where the wire had cut in, not deep, but tight enough that it couldn't move. She reached forward, not fast, just steady. Her voice didn't rise. "Easy now." David watched her closely. Her movements were measured. Her hand found the wire. Her fingers tested the tension, then found the place where it had been looped around a branch. She looked over her shoulder. "Knife!" He tossed it on her hand, hilt first. She caught it, cut once, twice, then used both hands to unwrap the rest. When the final strand snapped loose, the steer stumbled once, then limped free, favoring the leg but still standing. It looked at them, confused, then wandered slowly toward the open flat. David whistled, low and sharp. The animal moved toward the horses. Naya handed back the knife. "Not bad," he said. She shrugged. He was scared, not wild. They didn't say much after that, just turned back toward the cabin. That evening, he boiled potatoes for the first time since she'd arrived. She cooked the salted pork. They didn't plan it, just moved around each other near the stove, handing off utensils, trading spots at the counter. The meal was better than any they'd had in weeks, and neither commented on that. Afterward, they sat outside. The wind had died. The yard was still. The first stars came out over the ridge, pinpricks above the low clouds, finally drifting east. Naya leaned back on her elbows, seated on a log they'd hauled over that morning. David stood near the fence, arms folded, watching the sky. "You have any family left?" she asked. "None that matter. Ever think of leaving this place?" He shook his head. "Thought about it once. After the sickness. Packed up. Got as far as Fort Westcott. Stayed one night. Saw too many faces. Too many questions." She didn't press. "I came back the next day," he added. Didn't even unpack. Just kept going. She looked down at the dirt near her boots. "When I was sent out, they gave me two things. A blanket and a piece of bread." He turned to her. "They said I could take the path west or stay tied to the pole. I walked 2 days without speaking. Didn't eat the bread. Threw it to the crows on the second morning." She rubbed one hand along the edge of her boot. "Didn't want to carry what they gave me." David said nothing, but he understood more than he could say. After a long pause, she stood. "I'm going to wash up." She disappeared inside. He remained out there a while longer, listening to the sounds of the quiet night. An owl, the creak of the cabin roof, the faint whistle of breeze through dry grass. Everything felt lighter, somehow, less like something could fall apart with one mistake. When he returned inside, she was sitting near the fire again, hair still damp, arms tucked around her knees. He paused at the door, then said, "If you want a space that's yours outside, maybe where you don't have to ask or explain, I can build it." She looked up. Her face softened just slightly. "I'm fine here. For now." He nodded, took off his coat, and sat across from her. The fire popped once, scattering sparks that danced and vanished. And in that silence, something shifted, not spoken, not agreed upon, but known. She hadn't just followed him back to the cabin today. She had stayed. The following week passed without event, but not without weight. Routines settled into the cabin like dust on window sills, quiet, barely visible, but unmistakably present. Mornings began early, without needing to be discussed. She tended the stove and water. He fed the animals and walked the fence. Their words remained few, but actions filled the silence with something steady. Work was done without asking. Tools were handed off without delay. The rhythm they built wasn't based on affection or necessity. It was shaped by caution turned into function. The 6th morning since the steer incident, a sound broke that rhythm. Hooves. Not his. Not hers. 2 riders. Maybe 3. Approaching slow from the North Trail. Too slow for cowhands. Too loud for travelers. David stood beside the barn, shovel in one hand, spine already stiffening as the noise reached his ears. He didn't move right away. Just looked across the yard to the cabin, where Naya stood near the clothesline, a pail of damp linens in her grip. She heard it too. She didn't ask questions. She didn't finish what she was doing. She placed the pail down gently, straightened her back, and walked to the cabin without looking behind her. Not fast, not panicked, just certain. David waited until she was through the door before heading to the porch. He leaned the shovel against the beam, wiped his palms on his pants, then stepped down onto the dirt. His rifle wasn't slung over his shoulder, but it stood within arm's reach just inside the doorway. He didn't fetch it. Not yet. The riders came into view a moment later. Two men, both middle-aged, both riding mules rather than horses. That told David more than anything else. Mules were for men who worked angles and weren't in a hurry to leave. One wore a dust-covered gray jacket. The other had a bandana around his throat that was too clean for travel. They didn't smile. They didn't dismount. "You hold?" The one on the left asked, voice casual but sharp. David didn't answer right away. Just took a step forward, boots sinking slightly in the soft dirt. "Depends. Name's Finch," the man continued. "Heard you at Stock Run through Marshall's Bluff last week. A few stray brands turned up in the wrong hands. Just check in on movement." David let that sit a moment. "I don't run cattle that far east." "Well," the man said, looking past David toward the barn. "Could be someone else used your mark." David shifted his weight slightly, not threatening, but planted. "You bring a ledger?" "Writ from the sheriff." The other man leaned forward on his mule's neck. "We don't need one to ask questions." David's eyes didn't move. "Then you can ask from the trail." There was a pause. Neither man spoke. Behind David, the cabin door opened. Naya stepped out, face unreadable, holding a sack of flowers she pretended to be checking near the front shelf. She didn't look at the men, just walked across the porch and down toward the storage shed near the corral. Her pace was even. Her eyes never touched theirs. The man named Finch watched her go, then smiled faintly. "She yours?" David didn't look at him. "She's not yours." The man's smile faded. "That's what I figured," Finch muttered. Couldn't place her face. "Apache, maybe. Stray. You looking to buy people now?" Finch looked at his partner. They both chuckled once. "Forced." "No," he said. "But I figure it helps to know who's living on which land." "She's here," David said. "That's all you need to know." Another pause. This one longer. Finally, Finch pulled his mule's reins. "Well, we got what we came for." No trouble meant. David didn't answer. They rode off, hooves soft in the dust, their backs straighter than when they arrived. That night, she didn't bring up the visit, but she did light the lantern early, set out 2 tin cups without asking, and poured half a measure of whiskey into each before sitting down. He noticed, but didn't comment. She drank half of hers, then spoke. "Those men, what would they have done if I'd answered the door?" David didn't lie. "Maybe nothing. Maybe asked you who you were and if I had papers." She looked down into her cup. "They weren't law." "No." "Then they had no business asking." He nodded. "That's the thing about men like them. They don't wait for business. They just sniff around and see who flinches first." She didn't flinch now, just said, "I didn't like the way he looked at me." "I didn't either." They drank in silence for a while. The wind had calmed. Firelight moved across the wood walls. "Back home," she said finally, "when men came riding like that, we'd have to pack everything and leave by morning. Even if they smiled. Especially if they smiled." David's jaw tightened slightly. "You don't have to leave." She looked at him long and hard. Not with suspicion, but as if testing the edges of the promise. "I need you to mean that," she said. "I do." And that was the last word spoken between them that night. The following morning, she was up before him. She was outside near the barn, hammering fresh nails into a storage crate. He stepped out, pulled on his coat, and approached. "What's that for?" "Dry goods," she said. "If more men come, we can hide the sacks easy." He watched her drive the nail with 2 firm strikes. "Smart. I've done it before." He waited a beat. "I won't let them take you." She stopped hammering, stood straight, turned slowly. "Don't promise that," she said. "I will. You don't know what they'll do. Or who'll come next." He stepped closer. "I've lost enough." Her hands dropped to her sides. "Then don't lose this place. Don't lose it over me." He didn't reply. He just reached out, not touching her, just standing beside her. "If this place ain't worth protecting for both of us, then it never was." She didn't look away, and she didn't walk off. She stayed. The sun rose without color the next morning, more shadow than light, its arrival muffled by the thick, dust-heavy sky that had crept in overnight. There'd been no wind, no rain, yet everything looked dimmer, washed in pale grays and browns, as if the land itself had been holding its breath too long. The kind of morning that makes silence louder. David sat on the cabin steps, cup in hand, boots dusty from a pre-dawn check of the southern fence. The boards had held. No new tracks. No signs of return from the men who'd come days earlier. But he didn't trust that quiet. It felt like a trick. He stared out over the yard, watching the stillness, not drinking from the cup, just holding the heat in his fingers. His rifle leaned against the doorframe, loaded, oiled, ready, same as it had been every night since that visit. Naya emerged without sound, coat over one shoulder, hair tied back tight, a strip of cloth wrapped around her left wrist where the skin had split from work the day before. She glanced at him, then scanned the land beyond the fence. No words. She moved toward the shed without comment, dragging a dry burlap sack behind her, filled with cracked corn and tools. He didn't follow. Not yet. Inside, she worked alone, sorting nails, stacking empty tin cans, marking which sacks needed boiling for pests. She knelt beside the crates she had reinforced last week, checking the lids, readying the rope handles. Her movements were exact, focused, not frantic, not anxious, just certain. If she had to leave fast, she'd know where everything was. David finally stepped in, ducking under the doorframe, hands rough from the morning cold. You planning for something? She didn't stop working. I plan for what's likely. He leaned against the post, arms folded. You think he'll come back? I don't guess, she said. I just prepare. He watched her for a long moment. I don't like running, he said. Neither do I, she replied. But I've done it more than most. That sat between them a while. Then she stood, wiped her hands on the edge of her coat, and looked him full in the face. If they come back, what's your plan? I don't have one yet. You should. He nodded slowly. I know. She stepped past him into the light, pausing only once. If this place is going to hold, it has to hold under pressure. By midday, they had cleared the barn loft. It had been piled with old tools, leather strips, broken wagon parts, leftover clutter from whoever had owned the land before David claimed it. Most of it useless, but Naya insisted on sorting each piece, testing every hinge and latch. When he tried to burn the cracked saddle horn, she stopped him. Don't throw it, she said. Cut it down. The leather might still have a use. He didn't argue. They worked side by side, sweat streaking their shirts, dust thick in their lungs. The space slowly emptied, corner by corner. By late afternoon, they'd laid out a wide tarp and refastened the wooden slats into a makeshift storage box. When they finished, she leaned against the wall, wiped the back of her neck, and said, Now we've got a second place to move supplies if we need to. You think like a soldier, he muttered. I had to live like one. He met her eyes. I didn't expect you to stay this long. I didn't expect to want to. That caught him off guard. She turned away after that, moved toward the ladder. But her words didn't fade like they usually did. They hung there, unmoving. That evening, the air changed again. A distant echo of thunder rumbled low beyond the ridge. Dry thunder, no rain, but enough to stir the animals. The horses moved uneasy in their stalls. The cattle clustered too close together near the northern fence. David lit a lantern early, knowing darkness would fall quicker than usual. Naya closed the windows tight, checked the rifle placements, made sure both their boots stayed near the door. They didn't talk about the storm, not the one overhead, not the one they still felt under their skin. Inside, supper was quiet. She cooked beans with peppers she'd found tucked behind the storage tins. He sliced cornbread without crumbling it. They ate slow, seated on opposite sides of the table, watching the flames in the stove more than each other. Finally, after the plates were cleared, she asked, You ever kill a man? He didn't flinch. Yes. How many? He stared down at the table. 3. She didn't ask names. Or why. Or when. Regret any of them. Not one. She nodded once, then said nothing more. Later that night, the wind picked up again. Not harsh, just steady. Familiar. David stood on the porch, coat tied around him, watching the tree line where it dipped near the creek bed. Every so often he scanned for movement. Nothing came. Naya joined him after a while, stepping into the night without sound. She brought a mug of coffee, handed it to him without speaking. Her hand brushed his briefly. He felt the warmth of her fingers even through the chill. "They'll test us again," she said quietly. "I know, but you don't look scared." "I'm not." She tilted her head slightly. "Not even of losing this." He looked at her now, straight on. "I've lost things I built with my hands. With hope. With blood. But this isn't built from hope. What is it built from? Choice." She considered that, then said, "Choice holds better than fear." They stood shoulder to shoulder as the wind swirled. The cattle let out low sounds in the distance. An owl called once, then fell silent. They didn't return to the cabin right away. Neither wanted to go in first. Eventually, she turned, walked toward the door, paused, and asked without looking back, "If they come again, really come, you still gonna say this place is worth holding?" David didn't answer with words. He just followed her inside and locked the door behind them. The air was thick with dust by early evening. Not the kind kicked up by wind or animals. This dust came with footsteps. Measured, deliberate, no warning whistle, no wagon creak, just the weight of boots pressing into dry earth. David noticed first. He'd been replacing a hinge on the barn side door, crouched low, back to the slope. His hand froze mid-swing when he caught the sound, a dull rhythm that didn't match any routine movement of animal or wind. He didn't stand, just tilted his head enough to track the direction, squinting toward the ridge behind the water trough. They came in a slow line, for men, not together in posture, but tied by purpose. The lead wore a long coat open at the sides, revolver visible on his left hip, hat pulled low. The second one trailed slightly, younger, with a rifle slung crossbody and a nervous stance. The other two hung back, not armed visibly, but heavy in presence. They walked like men who decided on something already. David rose with quiet motion, not rushing, and crossed the yard toward the cabin. Naya was at the wash basin inside, sleeves soaked up to her elbows, hair damp from cleaning. She looked up once, read his face, and didn't need to ask. He reached for the rifle near the door, checked the chamber. "Full. They're not passing through," he said flatly. "How many?" "4." She moved to the table, took the shorter carbine from under the bench, and loaded 3 rounds without hesitation. Then tied her hair back, tight and high. "Want me out of sight?" "No." They stepped onto the porch together. The 4 men didn't speak until they were within 20 feet. Dust hung around their boots, curling in little spirals. The lead stopped first, looked over the cabin, the fence line, the barn. His eyes settled on Naya briefly before returning to David. "You were warned," the man said. David said nothing. "We gave you a chance to clean up the mess. Let pass. Now we're back, and we ain't asking." Still no answer. "You can walk," the man continued. "Leave the girl, and nothing else gets burned." Naya lifted the carbine slowly, let the barrel rest against her thigh. Not aiming, not threatening, but clear. "She doesn't belong to you," David said finally. "She doesn't belong to you either. She doesn't have to." The man's face twitched slightly. His hand shifted on his belt. "Not to draw, not yet, but close. I don't think you understand the cost of making this your hill." David stepped forward once. "I've paid worse prices." The man took a slow step too. The distance narrowed. Behind him, the youngest shifted his weight, eyes darting between the cabin and the barn. He was the weak link. "You're alone," the leader said. "2 of you against 4. David didn't blink. "I've been outnumbered before." Silence stretched. Then, for a moment, no one moved. The wind died altogether. Naya stepped forward then, just a pace, lifted the carbine shoulder high, steady. "Take another step," she said, "and you'll see how cursed I really am." The man grinned, but it didn't last. David raised the rifle. One of the others flinched. The younger man's hand went for the strap of his rifle. That was the mistake. The crack of gunfire broke the stillness. Naya's shot hit first, low, controlled, taking the rifle clean out of the boy's hands before he could aim. He dropped it with a yelp and staggered backward. David's shot came half a second later, clipping the edge of the lead man's coat. Not meant to kill, just to settle the question. The third man raised his hands. The fourth stepped behind the mule he'd been leading and didn't reappear. "You think we won't come back?" the leader shouted, backing off with a snarl. David didn't lower the rifle. "You come back," he said. "You better dig your own graves first." The man hesitated, then turned, half dragging the younger one by the collar. They retreated without a final word. Inside the cabin, Naya leaned the carbine against the wall and sat on the floor near the stove. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the drop of tension that comes after a line is held. David sat beside her. "They won't forget this," she said. "They don't need to," he replied. "We just made sure they'll think twice." She nodded, eyes still on the fire. "I used to think staying meant waiting to be broken. And now it feels like something you do on purpose." David didn't reply right away. He just watched the flames settle, then reached over and gently wrapped her hand in his. This time, she didn't pull away. The next morning opened quiet. No wind, no clouds, just still, dry air and the faintest warmth rising off the land as the sun crept over the ridge. The kind of day that felt like a held breath, not because of fear, but because something had finally passed. David stepped out of the cabin at first light, rifle slung across his back. Not because he expected trouble, but because routine was something he trusted. The barn door creaked faintly as he walked by. Two of his steers had moved to the upper pasture, grazing lazily near the boundary post. He paused, counted them, then moved along. Behind him, the cabin remained quiet. Naya hadn't come out yet, but he wasn't worried. She'd stayed up late, checking the storage crates again, reloading cartridges, sharpening the edge on her knife until the steel flashed. After everything, she'd slept harder than he'd seen since the first day she arrived. He gathered 2 armloads of firewood, stacked them near the porch, then repaired the trough sidewall where a plank had cracked in the storm. Every task felt easier than the day before, not because the work had changed, but because the reason for doing it had. By the time he returned inside, Naya was standing at the stove, sleeves pushed up, hair loosely tied, stirring a pot that smelled of beans and cumin. She glanced back at him once, then returned her focus to the meal. "You get everything squared away?" she asked. He nodded, pulling off his coat. "Troughs fixed. Fence lines holding. No new tracks." She set the spoon down, turned, and leaned against the counter. "Think they'll come back?" "No, not after what happened." He didn't mean the fight. He meant the message. She nodded once. "I believe you." Later that morning, they sat on the porch, mugs warm in hand, watching dust spin in the sunlight. David leaned against the post, one boot up on the rail. Naya sat beside him, blanket wrapped across her knees. They didn't speak much. There wasn't a need. Everything that had to be proved had already been. After a while, she asked, "You ever think about making it permanent?" He looked over. The cabin. "No. This. Us." He didn't answer right away. Just took a slow breath. "I didn't think it was possible before you." She held his gaze for a moment, then looked out over the land. "I'm tired of waiting for a place that doesn't ask me to run." "You found it." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small pouch. Inside was a copper ring, plain, slightly misshapen, forged years ago for no one in particular. He'd kept it tucked away in the bottom drawer, under a folded handkerchief, untouched. He handed it to her. "I'm not good with words, but this means you never have to leave again, unless you choose to." She turned the ring in her fingers, quiet, studying it from all sides. Then she slipped it on without hesitation. "I choose to stay," she said. David didn't smile wide, but the change in his eyes was clear. So was hers. That afternoon, they moved the cot out of the main room, folded it, tied it shut, and stored it in the barn loft with the rest of what they no longer needed. They rearranged the shelves, set up a second chair at the table like it had always belonged there. Naya unpacked the last of her things, a leather pouch with sewing needles, a comb wrapped in cloth, and a single carved stone from her late husband's grave. She placed it on the shelf by the stove. David didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Later, they rode out together, slow-paced, through the upper pasture. The mare walked steady under Naya, and she sat tall, more sure in the saddle than the first time he saw her walk behind him along the trail. They didn't go far, just far enough to see the horizon from a higher place. Far enough to feel how wide the land stretched, how strong it stood beneath them. When they stopped, she asked, "This the edge of it?" He nodded. Far as I ever went. Then let's build something farther. He looked at her. You serious? Yes. And he believed her. That evening, they ate by lamplight. David repaired a buckle on the saddle, while Naya sewed a patch onto his coat. Her hands moved carefully, threading the needle through stiff fabric. He watched her a long while, then reached over and laid his hand on hers. She stopped. You're not cursed, he said plain. I know that now, she replied. I think I knew it the first time I saw you. She looked down at their hands. I've never had a man stay. Not because he had to. I'm staying because I want to, and I'm not leaving. She leaned against his shoulder after that. Not as a guest, not as someone passing through, but as someone whose name belonged there now. That night, the stars came out full. They stood out front in silence, arms brushing, listening to the wind settle back into something soft and regular. The barn creaked, distant cattle lowed. A single owl hooted once, then went quiet again. David wrapped his coat around her shoulders. She didn't protest. He looked at the sky. You ever think peace would feel this quiet? She shook her head. I thought it'd come with noise. Applause. Relief. It comes with small things. Like waking up in the same place. Next to someone who won't walk away. She smiled then. Small. Real. He took her hand. And they stood like that for a long time, saying nothing more. Because sometimes peace is loud. And sometimes it's just someone choosing to stay when they don't have to. This time they both did, and neither would leave.